Hi, my name is Ed Griffin, and it's my privilege to be able to introduce to you a most unusual program. We're going to be hearing a voice from the past. The man you're going to hear is Dan Smoot. And back in the late 50s and early 60s, Mr. Smoot had a most popular television program. And he was watched by millions of Americans who appreciated his deep understanding of traditional American values and family values. And much of his analysis was controversial at the time. But with the unfolding years, we have seen that his predictions and his analysis were right on target. And so today, what he had to say back then really is a most current interpretation of what is going on under our very noses. And so it's an honor now to be able to present to you Mr. Dan Smoot.
A constitutional republic, not a democracy. A democracy is a political system in which the people periodically, by majority vote at the polls, select their rulers. The rulers then have absolute power to make whatever laws they please by majority vote among themselves. In a constitutional republic, the people also, by majority vote at the polls, select rulers who make laws by majority vote among themselves. But the rulers cannot make any laws they please because the Constitution severely restricts their lawmaking power. The ideal of a democracy is universal equality. The ideal of a constitutional republic is individual liberty. In this century, great strides have been made toward the goal of subverting our republic and transforming it into a democracy. The foremost tactic of the subverters is subversion of language. By calling America a democracy until people thoughtlessly accept and use the term, totalitarians have obscured the real meaning of American principles of government. Note the following passages from a recent article distributed by the New York Times News Service. Quote, "In the United States and in other leading democracies, recent years have seen perceptible growth in executive authority. As society becomes more equalitarian, it tends increasingly to concentrate absolute power in the hands of one single man. This is a voluntary surrender of a free people escaping from freedom to one autocratic master." End quote. And note the following from Gunnar Myrdal's An American Dilemma. Quote, "In America, liberty often provided an opportunity for the stronger to rob the weaker. Against this, the equalitarianism in the American creed has been persistently revolting. And in the conflict between equality and liberty, equality is slowly winning. In America, conservatism has to a great extent been perverted into a cult of the Constitution. This is unfortunate since the Constitution is in many respects impractical and ill-suited for modern conditions. The worship of the Constitution is also a most flagrant violation of the American creed. The Constitutional Convention was nearly a plot against the common people." End quote. Now, Gunnar Myrdal, a Swedish socialist, was hired by the Carnegie Corporation of New York in 1937 to direct a study of the Negro in the United States. He engaged a large staff, some of them communists and pro-communists. An American Dilemma resulted, first copyrighted in the United States in 1944. In 1954, the Supreme Court handed down a school segregation decision, which deliberately violated the Constitution, reversed a previous Supreme Court decision, and lit a fuse touching off explosive violence, which has been shattering our society ever since. The court cited An American Dilemma as one of the modern authorities on which it relied in preference to the Constitution for justification of its decision. An American Dilemma, written by a Swedish socialist, provided a basic rationale for the conversion of our free republic into an equalitarian democracy. Myrdal contends that the American Declaration of Independence, 1776, proclaimed the ideal of an equalitarian democracy because it contains the phrase, "all men are created equal." 11 years later, the Constitution created not a democracy founded on the ideal of equality, but a republic founded on the ideal of liberty. This is why Myrdal says the Constitutional Convention was nearly a plot against the common people. But he and those who parrot his ideas are either ignorant or dishonest. The Constitution was ordained specifically to safeguard the principles of liberty proclaimed by the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration's phrase, "all men are created equal," means that men are equal before the law and before the Creator, regardless of their inequality in human society. The Declaration says that men are endowed with unalienable rights, and that the purpose of government is to secure these rights. The unalienable rights of man enumerated in the Declaration of Independence do not include equality, but they do include liberty, along with life and pursuit of happiness. Equality of all men in the eyes of God and before the law is a condition essential to freedom, but no other kind of equality is possible. Government efforts to achieve material equality will produce crushing tyranny, but will not make people equal. The writers of the Constitution were anxious to safeguard liberty against dictatorship, monarchy they called it, but their chief anxiety was to protect the country against democracy. Edmund Randolph, delegate to the Constitutional Convention from Virginia, said the general object of the convention was to provide a cure for the follies and fury of democracy. Elbridge Gerry and Roger Sherman, delegates from Massachusetts and Connecticut, urged the Constitutional Convention to create a system to eliminate the evils that flow from the excess of democracy. Alexander Hamilton, delegate from New York, said, "We are now forming a Republican government. Real liberty is not found in democracy. If we incline too much to democracy, we shall soon shoot into a monarchy." John Adams, one of the giants of the American Revolutionary period, said, "Democracy will envy all, contend with all, endeavor to pull down all. And when by chance it happens to get the upper hand for a short time, democracy will be revengeful, bloody, and cruel." Speaking of pure democracy, in which the people by majority vote act as their own lawmakers, instead of electing representatives to make laws, James Madison said, "Such democracies have ever been incompatible with personal security or the rights of property. A republic promises the cure for which we are seeking." Madison, known as the father of the Constitution, knew and said that enlightened men will not always be at the helm of government to serve as proper guardians of the public weal. He knew that unlimited political power cannot safely be entrusted to the nation's elected representatives to use as a majority of them see fit because, he said, a majority of a group of men is far more likely to be tyrannical than one man is. In a democracy, if a majority should develop hatred for all blue-eyed babies and order them eliminated, the babies could be legally executed because whatever a majority wants at any given moment is supreme law of the land in a democracy. How can liberty be safeguarded against the mindless, soulless tyranny of majority rule when government is founded on the principle of majority rule? Jefferson answered that one, "In questions of power, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief with the chains of the Constitution." In short, America was founded not as a democracy, but as a constitutional republic. We pledge allegiance to the republic for which our flag stands, not to a democracy. The Constitution requires a republican form of government for all states, but does not mention democracy, and neither does the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights. The Constitution is a binding contract, enumerating limited powers which the federal government can legally exercise, prohibiting it from exercising any powers not granted in the contract. It denies federal officials the power to do whatever they claim to be necessary for the general welfare. Federal action not clearly authorized by the Constitution is illegal, even if approved by an overwhelming majority of the people, because all the elastic powers of government are left with the states. Ultimate power to change the organic structure of government was left with the people, but the means of making changes, amending the Constitution, were carefully prescribed to militate against hasty, unwise decisions by the people. As Benjamin Franklin left the State House in Philadelphia on the closing day of the Constitutional Convention, a woman asked him what kind of government the convention had given America, and Franklin replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." Very old and very wise, Franklin saw through the mists of time to the day when Americans might trade their freedom in a constitutional republic for the promise of government guaranteed equality and security in a democracy. And beyond that, to the day when democracy inevitably degenerates into dictatorship, guaranteeing nothing but poverty and serfdom for the people it robs and rules. America's promise. To President Lyndon B. Johnson, a great society means government-provided housing, government-guaranteed medical care, government-financed education, government-stabilized agriculture, government-subsidized arts, government-controlled industry, government-regulated jobs, government-created material prosperity, and universal equality as defined and enforced by government. To the American Founding Fathers, a great society meant the direct opposite. It meant a political system which left people free to follow their own destinies with God's help. The promise of America is obvious to anyone who knows her early history, knows enough about the Founding Fathers to understand their lives and their ideals. But the teeming millions from Europe who glutted our eastern ports of entry and pushed across the continent to the Pacific in the 19th century, they, for the most part, were ignorant of the details of American history. What was the promise of America to them? A promise of fertile land, cheap and abundant? A promise of great deposits of natural resources? A promise of good climate? There have always been other places with greater natural resources, with climate as good or better, and with land more fertile and plentiful than in the United States of America. Those American pioneers who pushed through gaps in the mountains, driving westward with blue vistas of hope and adventure in their eyes, were they in quest of social security or some kind of government-guaranteed existence? Were they yearning for the fat and easy life? Were they bound for the land of the common man? Most of them were common men in the general evaluation of the world. Most of them were poor and would have welcomed abundance. They all were human and would have been glad to be spared hardship and arduous labor. But these were not the things they sought in the New World. They expected and they encountered more hardship and harsh toil in the raw American wilderness than they had left behind in Europe. They were looking for a place where a common man could, God willing, become uncommon, where a man could become whatever his vision, his faith, his energy, his intellect, and his manhood combined to make him, without a government to harass him and hold him down to a common level for the benefit of the general welfare. In short, the promise of America was freedom. Today, a whole generation of Americans have been educated to believe that freedom means ease and comfort. Freedom is not a soft way of life, but it is the only noble way for creatures made in the image of God. When man is left free to struggle, he develops strength and wisdom by struggling. When forced into dependence upon government, he becomes a dependent personality, flabby and irresolute, with no will, courage, or personal convictions. A free man can dream and will dare to enter what Job called the warfare of life, to capture his dreams and transform them into reality. A dependent personality has no dream of conquering anything. He has instead greed. Greed to get all he can for himself, not by constructive effort, but by continuing demands upon the power which made him dependent. There are many hazards in a free society. One hazard is that there will always be people who will not manage their own affairs as well as they should, or as well as someone else thinks they should. But when you start passing laws to force people to do all the things that someone else thinks good for them, you are headed for a slave society. The early American patriots had a deep suspicion of all government, including the one they created. They knew that the worst threat to a man's life, liberty, and property is the government under which he lives. They knew that all governments will, if permitted, waste the labors of the people and ultimately enslave the people, always under the pretense of taking care of the people. Modern liberals are not suspicious of government. They worship government. They want to set government up as a kind of big brother deity to look after us and run our lives for us. Modern liberals presume that you, an individual, if left to your own devices and resources, do not have enough decency, ability, or good sense to educate your own children, provide your own housing, prepare for your own future, or help a neighbor in desperate need. Therefore, liberals want laws which will force you to do all things that liberals think you should do. They take money away from you and put it in a big federal pot, on the presumption that politicians and bureaucrats will make better use of your money than you would. But remember, politicians and bureaucrats are themselves individuals. As individuals, they, according to their own liberal philosophy, are incapable of managing their own affairs. Once vested with political power, they are presumably transfigured and transformed. automatically injected with enough ability to manage the affairs of the world. In short, modern liberalism rests on the assumption that political power makes men wiser than God. As philosophies of government, modern liberalism, communism, and fascism are all essentially the same. Each believes that government should have absolute power to promote the general welfare. The trouble here is that when government has absolute power to promote the general welfare, government must have absolute power to decide what the general welfare is. Why do communists murder people in nations they take over? Well, they're promoting the general welfare as communists see it. The welfare state, with the usual trappings of government price controls, government fixed minimum wages, government subsidies, government relief for the poor, and government pensions, was tried out in ancient Babylon, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, in Mussolini's Italy, in Hitler's Germany, and in all communist countries. It has always failed to provide economic security and has always ended in tyranny. A government which can take a warm personal interest in one citizen can take a cold, calculating interest in another. A government which can subsidize your farm or business or send you checks for unemployment or relief can also seize the bodies and property of your sons and daughters. Many Americans are pitifully confused in their efforts to defend Americanism against communism because they do not really know the difference. They have the leadership of modern liberalism to thank for this confusion. Using the police power of government to take from those who have for redistribution among those who have not is called by our liberals achieving economic justice through the processes of democracy. In communist countries, the same thing is called liquidation of capitalism through the dictatorship of the proletariat. What is the Americanism concept of helping the have-nots? Every American has an individual responsibility under God to help others in distress. But the decision as to when, how much, and to whom is legally and morally his and not his government's. Government cannot make men prosperous any more than it can make men good. Government cannot produce anything. It can merely seize and divide what individuals have produced. Government can give the people nothing which government has not first taken away from them. And the amount which government doles back to the people or spends to promote their welfare is always less than it takes. America is a fabulous country, a land where lofty mountains and deep rivers bear names that are music on the tongue, names rich in the lore and legend of marvelous and mysterious Indian tribes who prefer death to surrender. But America is more than poetry. It is a land where men know that morality, conscience, and happiness can be achieved only by individual effort with divine help, where equality signifies the equal importance of individuals before God and before the law, but recognizes the infinite diversity of talents, tastes, ambitions, capacities, and material conditions as natural for free man and essential to the progress of human society, where stern men firm in their faith in God speak with divine authority when they say to their own government, "Thou shalt not abridge these freedoms which God has given us." I cringe when I hear an American praise the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and insinuate that it is an extension of the American Bill of Rights. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is a blueprint for international socialism. It is a promise of all member nations that the force of government will be used to level and spread material benefits until everyone enjoys the same kind of sameness that characterizes a fine litter of fattening hogs. The American Bill of Rights, on the contrary, tells government what it must not do. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects shall not be violated. Government shall not. That is the American philosophy of liberty, which spread abroad and tugged at the hearts of men all over the earth. That was the promise of America. Civil rights. On June 19, 1963, President Kennedy sent Congress a special message enlarging earlier proposals for civil rights legislation, demanding that Congress stay in session until the requested legislation was passed. Adam Clayton Powell boasts that he helped write the president's message. Powell has been associated with many communist fronts. He has been criminally indicted for income tax frauds. His tours of foreign nightclubs with his secretaries at taxpayers' expense have scandalized the nation, and his hatred of whites has been openly expressed. Yet Powell appears to be bidding for overall leadership of the militant Negro agitation groups, most of which have been infiltrated by communists. On October 2, 1963, a House Judiciary Subcommittee reported a strengthened version of the Kennedy Civil Rights Bill. 5 days after the assassination of President Kennedy, President Johnson urged Congress to pass the Civil Rights Bill as a tribute to the late president. In his State of the Union message, January 1964, President Johnson again urged Congress to give priority to the Kennedy Civil Rights Bill. On January 30, 1964, the House Rules Committee cleared the bill for debate and action in the House. The bill is nothing less than a demand for concentration of absolute power in the executive agencies of the federal government, to use the armed might, the courts, and the tax resources of the nation to enforce whatever action officialdom may deem necessary to eliminate discrimination. The Civil Rights Bill would eliminate state literacy qualifications for voting in all elections by providing that alleged completion of the sixth grade must be taken as presumption of literacy, whether or not the voter applicant can actually read and write. The bill would empower courts to appoint federal referees to supervise all elections in any area where less than 15% of voting age Negroes are registered to vote, regardless of the known fact that the low registration rate of Negroes, and of whites as well, in all areas of the nation, results not from any attempts to keep them from registering, but from their own apathy and ignorance about voting. In all elections, about as many whites as Negroes habitually refuse to register and vote. The Civil Rights Bill neither expresses concern about nor makes provisions for non-voting whites. This fact alone proves that the bill, touted as an anti-discrimination measure, is discriminatory legislation designed not to serve the national interest, but to attract political support from a specified racial group. One of the most important powers of state governments is that of setting voter qualifications. No subject was more thoroughly debated during the Constitutional Convention of 1787. When an illiterate, irresponsible individual of any race has as much voice in selecting political officials as an industrious, productive individual, what is to prevent the dregs and drones of society from plundering hard-working and productive citizens? Politicians can fan hatred in low-income groups, telling the masses they are poor because they are oppressed, making them believe that everyone who has something acquired it by evil means, promising to soak the well-to-do with taxes for benefits to the poor in order to redistribute wealth and guarantee that everyone has his fair share. The Founding Fathers, aware of this danger, created a constitutional system in which all, high and low, would be equal before the law, all equally free to lead their own kind of life as long as they did not infringe on the rights of others, all enjoying the same guarantees against tyrannical oppression by their own government. But the Founding Fathers felt that the vote, which in final analysis is the power to set the policies and direct the affairs of the nation, should be restricted to mature individuals who could understand and have some vested interest in the necessity of maintaining a constitutional system. Hence, there was demand in the Constitutional Convention of 1787 that the federal government be assigned the role of establishing voter qualifications throughout the Union. All such proposals were based on the fear that individual states might grant the voting right to people not qualified to exercise it. The proposals were defeated because a greater fear pervaded the thinking of the Founding Fathers, fear of creating a federal government so strong that it could destroy state governments and eliminate God-given rights of individuals. Admitting the need for voter qualifications which would keep the power of the ballot out of the hands of irresponsible people, the Founding Fathers felt there was a greater need to leave this basic attribute of sovereignty in the individual states. Hence, any proposal for federal intervention in elections violates the intent, the spirit, and the provisions of the Constitution. At present, suits by Negroes seeking admission to white facilities or seeking elimination of segregation are generally not initiated by the Negro individuals whose rights are allegedly abused, but are initiated in their behalf by racial agitation organizations. But at any rate, the government itself is not permitted to initiate suits on behalf of some individuals against other individuals, or against private organizations, or against state institutions. The Civil Rights Bill, on the contrary, would authorize the Attorney General to initiate legal action in behalf of colored persons. The United States government would use tax money to bear the legal cost for the colored persons. The persons or organizations against whom the government initiated action would bear their own legal expenses under a presumption of guilt. In any system of law founded on principles of freedom, all persons involved in litigation are considered equal before the courts and in the law, and all kinds of litigation are supposed to be of equal importance. The pending Civil Rights Bill would require preferential treatment in federal courts for litigation in behalf of Negroes claiming violations of their constitutional rights. The Civil Rights Bill would enable federal officials to use the tax resources and the power of the whole nation to enforce upon private organizations and state institutions and individuals attitudes and behavior prescribed by federal officialdom. The bill would enable federal agencies to cancel contracts with any firm doing business with the government if the firm does not hire as many Negroes as federal officials think it should hire, or if the firm does not give Negroes the kinds of jobs federal officials think they should have. The bill would authorize federal agencies to withhold grants of tax money to state and local agencies, private or otherwise, for any program, schools, colleges, hospitals, housing, roads, urban renewal, any kind of program, if federal officials determine that any kind of racial discrimination is involved in the program. Yet discrimination is not defined. It means anything federal officials want it to mean. The public does not even dimly realize how far the financial provisions of the Civil Rights Bill would reach. They would reach out to every bank and lending institution which participates in the FHA or other federal home loan program, which participates in the Federal Reserve System, or even in programs of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. If the Civil Rights Bill is enacted in its present form, federal officials can lay a heavy hand upon practically every citizen who builds, buys, sells, or rents a place to live, prescribing conditions under which he may obtain funds to acquire a home, making rules for use of the property after he acquires it. Banks can be forced to implement the edicts of the federal bureaucrats through foreclosures, refusal of loans, blacklisting, evictions. The Equal Accommodations in Public Facilities section of the pending Civil Rights Bill is most dangerous of all. Here is the essence of that section in the language of the late president, quote, I am proposing to guarantee all citizens equal access to the services and facilities of hotels, restaurants, places of amusement, and retail establishments. The proposal would give the persons aggrieved the right to obtain a court order against the offending establishment or persons, end quote. Here is the president's key sentence concerning the authority for federal officialdom, thus to eliminate the private property rights of businessmen, quote. The argument that such measures constitute an unconstitutional interference with property rights has been rejected by courts in upholding laws designed to make sure that private property is used in a way consistent with the public interest, end quote. In other words, an American citizen has no right to own and use private property unless he uses it in a way that officialdom considers consistent with the public interest. Today, the demands of racial agitation groups fix official notions of what is consistent with the public interest. Tomorrow, it could be something else. Federal officials could order private employers to hire or not hire Catholics, Jews, Presbyterian, Methodists, Mormons, Christians, Scientists, atheists. Federal officials could compel private businessmen to do anything officialdom wants on the simple pretext of requiring the use of private property in a way that is consistent with the public interest. Every United States senator and representative should receive millions of letters from Americans of all races demanding rejection of the Civil Rights Bill. Goodbye. God bless you.